The alarms had stopped working 3 days ago. That was the first thing Captain Elena Voss noticed when she woke up on the floor of the bridge, her head ringing, and her mouth tasting like blood and metal. The silence was worse than the noise had ever been. On a ship like the Nightfall's Edge, silence meant something was dead. Systems, people, or both. She pulled herself up, using the edge of a broken console. Sparks no longer jumped from it. Even the sparks had given up. Around her, the bridge looked like a battlefield, because it was won. Chairs torn from their mounts. A support beam had fallen across the navigation station, crushing it flat. The big front window, usually filled with a calm view of stars, was cracked in a spiderweb pattern that made the stars look broken too. Elena was 44 years old, though the deep lines on her face made her look older. She had commanded the Nightfall's Edge for 6 years. It was a dark ship, one of humanity's newest and strangest weapons, built to hide in the black nothing between the stars, to see without being seen. It ran on drained power cells and dark coatings that swallowed light and radar waves alike. It was supposed to be a ghost. Now it was a ghost in a different way. Most of the crew was dead. She checked her arm. Broken, probably, though the numbness told her the ship's emergency medical foam had already sealed the injury. Small mercy. She limped toward the comm station, stepping over a body she recognized. Ensign Marcus Cole, 26 years old. He had a habit of humming old Earth songs while he worked, songs nobody else on the ship even remembered anymore. He wasn't humming now. Elena did not stop to grieve. There was no time, and grief was a thing for later, if there was a later. "Ship," she said, her voice cracking. "Status report." Nothing answered. The ship's mind, the artificial intelligence called Oracle, had been quiet since the attack. Elena tried again, tapping in manual codes with her good hand. A weak, crackling voice finally answered. "Captain Voss, this is Oracle, running at 12% capacity. Talk to me, Oracle. What's our status?" "Hull integrity, 41%. Life support, failing on decks 2 through 5. Engine core, damaged but stable. Crew." The AI paused, and even through the broken voice, Elena thought she heard something like sorrow. "Crew count, 3, including you, Captain. 3, out of 112. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment. Then she opened them again, because the ship needed her, and whoever was still breathing needed her, and Earth needed to know what she had seen. "Where are we?" she asked. "Drifting," Oracle said. "No engines online for course correction. Current trajectory will bring us near the Sol system. Estimated arrival, 9 days. 9 days. Elena almost laughed. 9 days to nurse a dying ship halfway across a broken star system, with only 2 other people alive to help her, carrying news that could change everything humanity thought it knew about the galaxy. She found the other survivors in the emergency shelter near the engine room. One was Chief Engineer Talia Reyes, a stocky woman, with burns across half her face, still conscious but barely. The other was a young technician, named Devon Okafor, who looked more scared than hurt, sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, staring at nothing. "Captain," Talia said, forcing a weak smile. "Good to see you're not a corpse yet." "Give it time," Elena said, kneeling beside her. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Engines holding together with tape and prayers. I can maybe get us 30% thrust if I sacrifice the backup life support." Talia coughed. "Your call." Elena thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Do it. We need speed more than comfort right now." While Talia worked with shaking hands to reroute power, Elena's mind drifted back to what had happened. Not because she wanted to remember, but because she had to. She needed every detail clear in her head, because if she reached Earth, she would only get one chance to explain what she had seen out there in the dark. It started 3 weeks ago, on a routine Deep Scout mission past the edge of explored space. The Nightfall's Edge had been sent to investigate strange energy readings near a dead star system nobody had ever bothered naming, just a string of numbers on a star chart. Command expected debris, maybe an old alien ruin. Nothing dangerous. Dark ships weren't meant for combat after all. They were built to look, not to fight. What they found first was wreckage, not human wreckage. Ships unlike anything in the human database, their hulls a strange bone-white color, twisted and torn apart as if something had ripped them open from the inside. Elena remembered floating in the observation dome, staring at a piece of hull the size of a small moon, and feeling a chill she couldn't explain. Oracle, run analysis, she had ordered. Unknown origin, Oracle reported. Material composition does not match any known species in the database. Estimated age of wreckage, 6 months to 1 year. Fresh wreckage, which meant whatever destroyed these ships might still be nearby. They should have left then. Protocol said to leave. But Elena had made a choice that still haunted her. A choice born from curiosity and a soldier's need to understand a threat before running from it. She had ordered the ship deeper into the debris field, scanning, recording, trying to learn who these aliens had been and what had killed them. That was when they found the survivors. Not human survivors, alien ones. A small group of creatures, tall and thin with skin like pale silver, clustered inside a half-destroyed escape pod, starving and terrified. When the Nightfall's Edge's sensors picked up their life signs, Elena didn't hesitate. She sent a boarding team to bring them aboard. Communication was difficult at first. The aliens, who called themselves the Caliph, used a language of clicks, low humming tones, and small flashes of color across their skin, like living lights. It took days of patient work from the ship's linguist, a young woman named Priya Anand, before real conversation became possible. What the Caliph told them changed everything. Their species had been peaceful, explorers and scholars, not fighters. They had never built a single warship in their recorded history, because they never needed one. The Caliph called it, in their own broken translation, the hollowing. It wasn't a single ship, or even a fleet in the way humans understood fleets. It was something else. A cloud. A swarm. Countless small drone-like vessels, acting as one mind, spreading across a system, like a disease spreads through a body. It didn't attack with weapons in the way humans expected. It consumed. It took apart planets, moons, ships, anything with matter and structure, breaking them down, and using the pieces to build more of itself. The Caliph homeworld, a planet that had held 9 billion souls, was gone in less than 3 weeks. Not destroyed, consumed, turned into raw material for something that had no face, no voice, and no mercy. Elena remembered sitting across from the Caliph elder, an ancient being named Sethriv, watching the alien skin flash a slow, sorrowful blue, as it spoke through the translator. "You must run," Sethriv had said, the mechanical translation flat but somehow still carrying weight. "You must warn your people. It does not stop. It does not sleep. It only grows." "Where is it now?" Elena had asked. Sethriv's skin flickered, colors moving like static. "Coming. Slowly. But coming." 3 days after the Caliph came aboard, the Nightfall's Edge's sensors detected it. A cloud of shapes on the very edge of scanner range, moving with a strange, patient hunger, like predators who knew their prey could not escape forever. Elena gave the order to run immediately. Engines pushed to their limit, the dark ship's stealth systems working overtime to hide their trail. It wasn't enough. Something out there noticed them anyway. The attack came without warning. No message, no demand, no threat. Just sudden, overwhelming force, as small drone shapes tore into the ship's hull like teeth into flesh. Elena remembered the horror of watching, on a cracked monitor, as parts of her own ship were stripped away and pulled into the swarm, matter and metal disappearing into the dark, like sand into water. They had barely escaped. A desperate jump through a dangerous, half-charted region of space had thrown the ship far from the swarm, but at a terrible cost. The engines were crippled. Most of the crew, caught in unshielded sections during the attack, did not survive. And the Caliph, all except old Sethriv, were lost when their section of the ship was torn away entirely. Sethriv had died 2 days later, from wounds that even human medicine couldn't heal. His last words, translated through a badly damaged system, still echoed in Elena's mind. "Tell them," he had said. "Tell your people what is coming. Tell them not to wait." Elena opened her eyes, pulled back to the present by the sound of Talia's tools clanking against broken machinery. Devon was helping now, holding a light steady with trembling hands. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then, slowly, hummed back to life, weak but alive. "We've got thrust," Talia said, wiping sweat and blood from her forehead. "Not much, but it's something." "Set a course for Earth," Elena said. Best speed you can manage, without the whole thing falling apart. And if it falls apart anyway? Elena looked toward the cracked window, toward the distant, faint smear of light that was still too far away to be recognized as home. Then we get as close as we can before it does. 9 days. 9 days to cross the gap between where they were and where they needed to be. 9 days for a broken ship, crewed by 3 exhausted, wounded people, to survive long enough to deliver a warning that could save billions of lives, or be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized crew. Elena thought of Sethriv's dying words, of the silver-skinned people who had trusted her with the last truth of their dying civilization, of the 9 billion Caliph who no longer existed, turned into fuel for a hungry, mindless swarm somewhere out in the dark. She thought, too, of Earth, of the crowded cities, the green fields, the oceans full of life, all the small, stubborn, unstoppable things that made up humanity. She thought of how easily all of it could be erased, the way the Caliph homeworld had been erased, if no one was warned in time. Oracle, she said quietly, prepare a message, full priority, command channel only. Message ready to record, Captain. Elena took a slow breath, steadying herself, pushing away the pain in her arm and the ache in her chest that had nothing to do with injuries. This is Captain Elena Voss, of the UES Nightfall's Edge, she began, her voice steady despite everything. I am transmitting an emergency warning to Earth Fleet Command. We have encountered a hostile, non-negotiable threat beyond the edge of known space. It has already destroyed one advanced civilization. It is coming this way. I repeat, it is coming this way. She paused, thinking of Marcus Cole's humming, of the crew she had lost, of Sethriv's flashing silver skin fading to gray. We do not have much time, she continued. And we do not have the luxury of disbelief. Behind her, the engines groaned, pushing the broken ship forward, inch by painful inch, toward a home that had no idea what was coming. The 9-day journey had begun. The message from the Nightfall's Edge reached Earth Fleet Command 4 days before the ship itself did. It traveled across the dark in bursts of encoded light, jumping from relay to relay, each one a small station, built by human hands, to keep watch over the growing space that humanity now called home. By the time it reached the command center buried beneath the mountains outside what used to be called Geneva, the message had been copied, checked, and flagged with the highest priority code that existed. Admiral Renata Kessler was the one who received it first. She was 61 years old, gray-haired, with the kind of tired eyes that came from decades of watching young men and women fly out into danger and not always come home. She had been in her office reviewing supply reports when the alert came through, and she remembered later that her first thought, seeing the priority code, was that someone had made a mistake. That code had not been used in over a decade. She watched the message twice, then she watched it a third time, sitting perfectly still in her chair, her coffee going cold beside her. Captain Elena Voss. She knew that name. Everyone in Fleet Command knew that name. Voss was one of the best dark ship captains in the fleet, careful, disciplined, not the type to panic or exaggerate. If Elena Voss said something was coming, then something was coming. Kessler called an emergency session of the Joint Command Council within the hour. The council chamber was a circular room deep underground, its walls covered with screens that could display star charts, fleet positions, or, in this case, the recorded message from the Nightfall's Edge, playing on a loop for the 12 most powerful military and political leaders left on Earth. When the message ended, silence filled the room for a long moment. General Aldrich Voss broke it first. No relation to Elena, despite the shared name, though the coincidence made more than one person in the room glance his way. He was a broad-shouldered man, with a scarred jaw, head of Earth's home defense forces, and not known for patience. This could be fabricated, he said. Trauma does strange things to people. Or this could be an enemy trick, something designed to scare us into a bad decision. The authentication codes are genuine, said Director Wen Li, head of Fleet Intelligence, a small woman with sharp eyes who rarely spoke unless she had something worth saying. This is Voss. This is the Nightfall's Edge. Whatever happened out there, it happened to a real ship with a real crew. That doesn't mean the threat is real, Aldrich argued. Maybe they encountered pirates. Maybe they encountered another human faction using unfamiliar tech. With respect, General, Kessler said, Have you seen human technology capable of consuming an entire planet's biomass in 3 weeks? Because I haven't, and neither have you. The room fell quiet again. Kessler let the silence sit before continuing. I've spent my whole career preparing for threats we could name. Pirates, rival factions, old Earth conflicts that never fully died. This is different. If even a fraction of what's in that message is true, we are looking at something that has already ended one civilization, and it is heading toward us. So what do you propose? Asked Councilwoman Ayanna Bright, the civilian representative, her voice steady, despite the fear plain on her face. We can't evacuate Earth. We don't have the ships. We don't have anywhere near enough ships. No, Kessler agreed. We don't. Which means our first priority is information. We need Captain Voss here, in person, to give a full report. We need to know what we're facing before we can decide how to face it. And if the ship doesn't survive the trip? Wenli asked quietly. Kessler's jaw tightened. Then we prepare based on the message we already have, and we hope it was enough. Fleet Command sent every available resource toward the Nightfall's Edge's projected path. Repair drones, medical shuttles, and a small honor escort of fighters were dispatched to meet the broken ship as soon as it came within range, both to help it survive the last stretch of the journey, and to make sure nothing unexpected followed it home. Aboard the Nightfall's Edge, those 4 days felt like 4 years. Elena barely slept. She catnapped in short bursts at the captain's chair, waking at every strange noise the dying ship made, afraid each time that this would be the moment everything finally broke apart for good. Talia worked constantly on the engines, coaxing more life out of failing systems with nothing but tools, sweat, and stubbornness. Devon, the young technician, found his courage slowly returning as he threw himself into helping wherever he could, patching hull breaches, rerouting power, doing anything to keep his hands busy and his mind away from the horror they had barely escaped. On the 6th day, Oracle's voice, still weak but steadier than before, broke the quiet of the bridge. Captain, long-range sensors detect multiple vessels approaching. Configuration matches Earth Fleet Command escort patterns. Elena felt something in her chest loosen slightly, a tightness she hadn't realized she was carrying. Confirm identification. Confirmed. Human vessels. Escort designation Bravo 7. They are hailing us. Put it through. A young officer's voice crackled over the comm, filled with a mixture of relief and awe. Nightfall's Edge. This is Lieutenant Commander Priya Sato, of the escort carrier Meridian. We read your beacon. God, we thought. We didn't think anyone made it out. Barely, Elena said, allowing herself the smallest, tired smile. Good to hear a friendly voice, Lieutenant Commander. We have medical and repair teams standing by, Captain. We'll get you home. Over the next several hours, the escort ships moved carefully alongside the Nightfall's Edge, sending over drones to patch the worst of the hull damage and stabilize the failing life support. A medical shuttle docked, and finally, for the first time in days, Elena allowed herself to sit while someone else checked her injuries. A young medic, gently splinting her broken arm and murmuring quiet reassurances she barely heard. She thought of the crew who wouldn't get this moment, Marcus Cole, the others whose names she carried now like stones in her chest. She thought of Sethriv, and the 8,900,000,000 Kalith, who would never see their homes again, because there was nothing left to see. 3 days later, escorted by a full honor guard of fighters, the Nightfall's Edge finally reached Earth orbit. Elena stood at the cracked observation window, her arm now properly splinted, her body cleaned up as best it could be, and looked down at the planet below. Blue oceans, green and brown continents, the scattered lights of cities glowing faintly, even in daylight, visible through gaps in the clouds. It was beautiful, in a way she had almost forgotten during the horror of the last 2 weeks. It looked so peaceful, so unaware. She thought about the Kalith homeworld, how it must have looked from orbit before the hollowing came. Probably just as beautiful, probably just as unaware. We're not going to let that happen here, she said quietly, to no one in particular. Beside her, Talia, exhausted but alive, looked out at the same view. You really think they'll believe us? The whole council, the public, everyone? They have to, Elena said. Because if they don't, and this thing is real, there won't be a second warning. A transport shuttle rose from the surface below, small against the vastness of space, carrying Admiral Kessler herself, unwilling to wait for a formal summons when the fate of the planet might be at stake. Elena watched it approach, feeling the weight of everything she still had to say, pressing down on her like gravity itself. When Kessler finally stepped aboard the battered dark ship, moving carefully around the still healing damage, she found Elena waiting for her on what remained of the bridge, standing at attention despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, despite everything. "Captain Voss," Kessler said, studying the younger woman's face, the deep lines of grief and fear etched into it. "Report." Elena straightened, and for a moment, the exhaustion in her eyes was replaced by something harder, something that had survived the deaths of nearly her entire crew and carried a warning across the stars, because it had to be carried. "Admiral," she said, "I need to speak with the full council. All of them. Today, if possible. What I have to tell you is going to change everything we thought we knew about our place in this galaxy, and we do not have time to waste." Kessler held her gaze for a long moment, seeing something in the younger captain's expression that told her every rumor, every fear that had been building since that first message arrived, was about to be confirmed. "The council is already gathering," Kessler said quietly. "Come, tell us everything." Elena nodded, and together, the two women left the broken bridge of the Nightfall's edge, walking toward a meeting that would decide the fate of everyone on Earth. Behind them, the ship that had carried the warning across the stars sat silent in orbit, scarred and battered, but alive. It had done its job. Now it was up to the people of Earth to listen. The full Joint Command Council gathered within 2 hours, an unusually fast assembly for a body that normally took days to organize even routine meetings. Word had spread quickly through Fleet Command's upper ranks that the Nightfall's edge had returned, and that its captain carried news serious enough to justify pulling council members away from a dozen other urgent matters. By the time Elena Voss walked into the underground chamber, supported by a cane she didn't really need but had been given anyway, every seat around the circular table was filled. She had changed into a clean uniform, though nothing could hide the exhaustion in her face or the healing wounds beneath her sleeves. She had also brought something with her, carefully carried in a small case by Devon, who insisted on coming, despite Elena's suggestion that he rest. It was the last physical thing they had recovered from the Caliph, a small device Sethriv had given her before he died, its purpose still not fully understood by the ship's limited scanning equipment. Admiral Kessler introduced her briefly, then gave the floor to Elena without further delay. "Thank you, Admiral," Elena said, standing at the head of the table, meeting the eyes of the 12 most powerful people on Earth. "I'm not going to waste time with pleasantries. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. I wish it were." She told them everything. The dead system with no name, marked only by numbers on old star charts. The alien wreckage, fresh and terrible, hull plating the color of old bone. The Caliph survivors, found starving in the wreckage of their broken civilization, and the slow, painful work of learning their language well enough to understand the horror they had lived through. She told them about the hollowing, about a swarm with no single mind that anyone could bargain with, no leader to negotiate with, no home base to attack in return. A cloud of countless small drone-like vessels that moved and acted as one, consuming everything in its path, turning planets and ships and cities into raw material for its own endless growth. "It doesn't want territory," Elena explained, her voice steady, even as the memory of it made her chest tighten. "It doesn't want resources in the way we usually think about resources, like fuel or metal, for building things we need. It wants matter. Any matter. It breaks things down at a level we don't fully understand yet, and it uses what it breaks down to make more of itself, more drones, more of the swarm." "How is that possible?" asked General Aldrich, his earlier skepticism now tempered by the grim seriousness in Elena's voice. "No known technology works that fast, that efficiently." "I don't know how it's possible," Elena admitted. "I'm not a scientist. I'm a soldier who watched it happen to another species' homeworld through translated second-hand accounts, and then watched it start tearing my own ship apart with my own eyes. I can tell you what I saw. I can't tell you how it works." She described the attack on the Nightfall's edge in careful, deliberate detail, because she knew every piece of information mattered now. The way the drones had appeared almost silently on sensors, small and easy to miss, until they were already closing in. The way they had torn through hull plating like it was paper, not with obvious weapons fire, but with something closer to disassembly, pulling matter apart and drawing it inward. The way the ship's automated defense systems had barely slowed them down before failing entirely. "We survived because we ran," Elena said. "Not because we fought it off. We got lucky with an emergency jump through a dangerous, uncharted region of space, and even then, we lost most of our crew and nearly lost the ship. If that swarm had been a little closer, a little faster, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Councilwoman Ayanna Bright leaned forward, her expression grave. "You said it destroyed the Calith homeworld in 3 weeks. Do we have any idea how fast it's moving now? Any idea how much time we actually have?" Elena nodded to Devon, who carefully opened the small case and placed the device from Sethriv on the table. It was small, no larger than a human hand, made of the same pale silver material as the Calith's own skin, covered in fine patterns that seemed to shift slightly in the light. "This was given to me by Sethriv, the Calith elder who survived the attack on his homeworld," Elena explained. "He called it a memory stone. From what we could translate before he died, it holds recorded information about the swarm, including data his own people gathered while trying to understand and track it before their world was destroyed. We don't have the technology to read it properly. The Calith's data storage methods are nothing like ours." Director Wen Li studied the device with obvious fascination, her sharp eyes already calculating possibilities. "If we can find a way to access this, it could tell us exactly what we're dealing with. Speed, size, behavior patterns, maybe even weaknesses." "That has to be a priority," Kessler said firmly. "Assign your best people to it immediately, Director. Understanding what's coming might be the difference between surviving it and ending up like the Calith." "There's something else," Elena said, and something in her tone made the room fall silent again. "Sethriv told me, before he died, that the Calith weren't the first. He said his people had found evidence of at least 2 other destroyed civilizations before their own homeworld was hit. Old ruins, abandoned outposts, signs of advanced species that simply stopped existing. He believed the swarm had been growing and consuming for a very long time, possibly centuries, moving slowly from system to system, always growing larger and stronger with each world it consumed." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical thing. Centuries. An entity that had been growing, unstoppable and unnoticed, for longer than most of the nations in this very room had existed. "Why hasn't anyone detected it before now?" General Aldrich asked, though his earlier hostility had faded into something closer to genuine fear. "Because it moves slowly, methodically, and it avoids anything it perceives as a serious threat until it's grown strong enough to overcome it," Elena said. "Sethriv believed it studies its targets before attacking, waiting until it has enough numbers to guarantee success. We were lucky. It hadn't fully committed its forces against my ship. If it had, none of us would have survived to bring this warning. So we have time," Ayanna said slowly, trying to find something hopeful in the horror of the report. "If it's cautious, if it studies before attacking, maybe we have time to prepare." "Maybe," Elena said, "but I wouldn't count on much. Sethriv's people had warning signs for months before the Hollowing fully committed to attacking their system, and it still wasn't enough to save them. 9 billion people, Councilwoman. Gone in 3 weeks once it decided to move. We can't afford to be complacent just because we might have some time." Admiral Kessler stood, drawing the attention of the room. "Then we don't waste whatever time we have. Effective immediately, this becomes Earth's highest priority. Director Lee, I want every available scientist working on that memory stone. General Aldrich, I want a full defensive review of every colony and outpost within range of the projected threat vector, based on whatever data Captain Voss can provide about the swarm's last known position and heading." "And the public?" Ayanna asked. "At some point, people are going to need to know what's coming. We can't keep something like this secret forever, not if we're asking for the kind of resources and sacrifice this will require." Kessler was quiet for a moment, considering. "We'll manage the information carefully. Panic helps no one. But you're right, Councilwoman. Eventually, humanity as a whole needs to understand what it's facing. We'll prepare a public statement once we have a clearer picture of what we're truly dealing with." Elena remained standing at the head of the table as the council began discussing logistics, resource allocation, and defensive strategies, the conversation growing louder and more urgent around her. She felt strangely distant from it all, her mind still half caught in the memory of Sethriv's dying words, of Marcus Cole's humming silenced forever, of 9 billion lives reduced to raw material for something that felt no more remorse than a wildfire feels for the forest it burns. She thought about what came next. The long, difficult work of convincing not just this council, but the entire scattered human civilization, spread across dozens of colonies and outposts, that an unstoppable, ancient threat was coming for all of them, and that the only way to survive it would be to do something humanity had never fully managed before: come together, completely, and without hesitation, against a common enemy that could not be reasoned with, only fought or fled from. "Captain Voss," Kessler said, drawing Elena's attention back to the present, "I know you've been through more than anyone should have to endure, but I need to ask, do you believe we can survive this?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering, thinking of Sethriv's silver skin flashing gray with grief, of the Caliph who had trusted a foreign species with the last truth of their dying world, rather than let that truth die with them. "I believe," Elena said slowly, "that we survive because we don't have another option. The Caliph didn't fight back, not really. They were scholars, explorers, a peaceful people who never built for war. We're different. We've spent our whole history fighting each other, learning hard lessons about survival the difficult way. That's not something to be proud of, most days. But maybe, for once, it's exactly what we need to be." The room fell quiet again, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Outside, far above the underground chamber, the sun continued to shine over a planet that had no idea, yet, how close it stood to sharing the Caliph's fate. The work of preparing humanity for what was coming had only just begun. 3 weeks after Elena Voss delivered her report to the Joint Command Council, humanity began to change in ways that had not been seen in generations. It started quietly, at first. Fleet Command issued new orders under the cover of routine military exercises, moving ships and resources toward the outer colonies, without explaining why. Scientists at a dozen research stations were suddenly reassigned to a single, highly classified project, one centered around a small silver device that nobody outside a very short list of names was allowed to see or discuss. Shipyards that had been building slowly, cautiously, for years, suddenly received massive new funding and impossible new deadlines. Elena Voss found herself at the center of much of it, whether she wanted to be or not. Her broken arm healed slowly, the ship's medical staff insisting she rest, though rest was difficult to find with the weight of what she knew pressing down on her every waking hour. Fleet Command wanted her available for every briefing, every strategy session, every moment when someone needed to hear, again, exactly what the swarm had done to the Caliph, and exactly what it might do to Earth if given the chance. She didn't mind, not really. It gave her something to focus on besides the guilt she still carried for the crew she had lost, for choices made in the moment that had seemed reasonable at the time, but had cost so many lives. Talking about the threat, working to prepare against it, felt like the only way to honor the people who hadn't made it home. Director Wen Li's science team made their first real breakthrough with the Memory Stone, 12 days after Elena's initial report. It took a combination of careful physical study and educated guesswork, comparing patterns on the device to what little translated Caliph language data existed from Priya Anand's earlier work. But eventually, a team of exhausted, excited researchers managed to access a portion of the stored information. What they found confirmed the worst of what Elena had already reported, and added new, troubling details. The swarm, which the science team began calling the Devourer Cloud in official reports, had first been detected by the Caliph almost 18 months before their homeworld fell. Early sightings had shown a relatively small cluster of drones, perhaps a few hundred, moving slowly through a distant, unpopulated system. The Caliph, being a peaceful and curious species, had actually sent a scientific expedition to study it. That expedition never returned. Over the following months, the swarm had grown steadily larger, consuming asteroid fields, abandoned mining outposts, and eventually, entire uninhabited planets, using the raw material to multiply its numbers again and again. By the time it reached the edge of Caliph space, it had grown from a few hundred drones into something the recovered data estimated at over 200,000 individual units, all moving and acting with the eerie, coordinated precision of a single organism. It's not just growing, Wenli explained during a tense briefing with Kessler, Elena, and General Aldrich. It's learning. The data shows changes in its behavior over time. Early encounters show it avoiding anything that showed strong resistance, retreating, rather than fighting losing battles. Later encounters, closer to the destruction of the Calith homeworld, show it committing overwhelming force immediately, without hesitation. It figured out that hesitation cost it resources and time. It adapted. So it's intelligent, Aldrich said grimly. Not just a mindless natural disaster. Intelligent in some sense, yes, Wenli confirmed. Though not intelligent the way we understand intelligence. There's no evidence of anything like individual personality, communication with outsiders, or attempts at diplomacy. It doesn't seem to want anything except growth, but it does learn from experience, and it does adapt its strategies. That makes it significantly more dangerous than a simple, mindless threat would be. What's our current best estimate on its size and location? Kessler asked. Based on growth patterns from the recovered data, combined with Captain Voss's report of the encounter with the Nightfall's Edge, we estimate the swarm has grown to somewhere between 350,000 and 500,000 individual drone units, Wenli said. As for location, using the Nightfall's Edge's last known position and heading before the attack, along with the ship's damaged trajectory afterward, we've narrowed down a probable search zone. It's moving slowly, consistent with earlier behavior patterns, but it does appear to be heading generally toward human space. Time frame? Elena asked, her voice tight. If it maintains its current pace and doesn't accelerate, best estimate is somewhere between 8 months and 2 years before it reaches the outer edges of human-controlled territory, Wenli said. But that estimate could be wrong. It could speed up. It could also, in theory, change direction entirely and never come near us at all. We simply don't have enough data to be certain. 8 months to 2 years. It wasn't much time, not for the kind of massive, coordinated preparation that would be needed, but it wasn't nothing either. Kessler seized on that fact immediately, using it to drive the next phase of humanity's response. Within a month, the truth began reaching the public, carefully managed but no longer hidden. Ayanna Bright, who had pushed hardest for transparency from the very beginning, helped craft the message that eventually reached every human colony and outpost across known space. It was not an easy message to deliver, and not everyone reacted well. There was panic, in places. Some colonies experienced riots as fear outpaced reason. Black markets for ships and supplies exploded overnight, as people who could afford it tried to buy their way toward the safety of the inner systems, away from the projected threat vector. Conspiracy theories spread just as fast as the truth did, some claiming the whole thing was a government trick to increase military funding, others claiming it was already too late, and evacuation was pointless. But something else happened too, something that made Elena, watching news reports from her recovery bed, feel a flicker of the hope she had been struggling to hold on to since Sethriv's death. People began to organize. Independent shipyards that had never worked with the military before started offering their services and resources voluntarily. Civilian pilots with old, half-forgotten combat training signed up for defense reserve units in numbers that overwhelmed recruitment offices. Scientists from rival colonies, who normally guarded their research jealously, began sharing data freely, working together on defensive technology, because, for the first time in a long time, there was something bigger than old rivalries to worry about. Elena remembered a message she received from an old friend, a retired engineer named Sam Torres, who had left the fleet years earlier, after losing a leg in a border skirmish nobody even remembered the details of anymore. His message was short. Heard about your report, Voss. Heard what's coming. I've still got 2 good hands and 30 years of experience building ships. Tell your people I'm ready to work. Tell them all of us are. It wasn't just Sam. Messages like his poured in from across human space, from people who had every reason to be afraid, and chose instead to be useful. Elena began to understand something about her own species, that she had perhaps always known, but never fully appreciated until now. Humanity was not, by nature, a peaceful or unified people. History was full of conflict, greed, and short-sighted cruelty. But when faced with a threat too large to ignore, something in the human spirit refused simply to lie down and wait for the end. 6 weeks after her initial report, Elena stood beside Admiral Kessler at the christening of a new class of warship. the first of what would eventually become an entire fleet, built specifically to counter the Devourer threat. They called the new ships Sentinels, faster and more heavily armed than anything in the previous fleet, designed based partly on lessons learned from the Nightfall's Edge's encounter, and partly on new technology, developed from studying whatever fragments of Kalith data the science teams had managed to translate. 6 weeks ago, Kessler said to the assembled workers, soldiers and civilians gathered for the ceremony, Captain Voss brought us news that could have broken this civilization. Instead, it woke something in all of us. We are not the same people we were 6 weeks ago. We understand now, more clearly than ever, what it means to stand together against something greater than ourselves. Elena, standing nearby, thought of Sethriv, of the Kalith, who had never had the chance to build anything like this, whose peaceful nature had left them unprepared for a universe that did not care about peace. She thought of Marcus Cole's humming, silenced forever in the dark between the stars, and of all the others who had given everything so this warning could reach home in time. She looked up at the massive new ship rising slowly into the sky, its hull gleaming, built by hands that had chosen not to give up despite overwhelming fear. They weren't ready yet, not truly. The Devourer cloud was still out there, growing, learning, patient in its slow, terrible way. But for the first time since she had watched her own crew torn apart in the dark, Elena allowed herself to believe that when it finally arrived, humanity would not simply vanish the way the Kalith had. They would be waiting. 14 months after Elena Voss first reported the existence of the Devourer cloud to Earth's Joint Command Council, the swarm was detected entering the outer edge of human-controlled space. The warning came from an automated sensor buoy stationed near a quiet mining colony called Percy Station, one of dozens of small outposts scattered along what military planners had come to call the Watch Line, a network of early detection systems built specifically for this moment. The buoy's final transmission, sent in the half-second before it was consumed along with everything else in its sensor range, showed a swarm far larger than even the most pessimistic estimates had predicted. Not 500,000 drones. Closer to 1 million, moving together with the same eerie, coordinated precision the Kalith data had described, a vast cloud of pale shapes eating its way steadily toward the heart of human civilization. Persis Station's 12,000 residents had 3 hours of warning. Most of them made it to evacuation ships in time, thanks to drills that had been run relentlessly over the past year, ever since Elena's warning had reached the public. Not everyone survived, but far more lived than would have, in a universe where that warning had never come. Elena was 46 years old now, her hair showing more gray than it had a year and a half earlier, when she received the alert aboard her new command, a Sentinel-class warship called the Second Chance. It felt strange, sitting in a captain's chair again, commanding a real fighting ship instead of a stealth scout, surrounded by a crew of nearly 300, instead of the small team she had lost aboard the Nightfall's Edge. But the fleet had insisted, and Elena, more than anyone, understood the importance of experience when facing an enemy this dangerous. Confirmed sighting at Percy Station, her communications officer reported, voice tight with barely controlled fear. Estimated swarm size, 1 million units. Distance from Earth, approximately 11 days at swarm's typical travel speed. 11 days. After 18 months of preparation, of shipyards working around the clock, of billions of people across dozens of colonies training, building and preparing for exactly this moment, it had finally arrived. Signal Fleet Command, Elena ordered. Tell them it's begun. The response from Earth came fast. Admiral Kessler, now overseeing the entire defensive effort from a command station built specifically for this crisis, ordered the full mobilization of the newly built Sentinel fleet, along with every other combat-capable ship humanity could gather. It wasn't just Earth's ships anymore either. In the months since the public warning had spread, humanity's scattered colonies, along with a handful of smaller allied alien species who had learned, through careful diplomacy, about the threat the Devourer cloud posed to everyone, had begun contributing ships and resources of their own. It wasn't a perfect alliance. There were disagreements, old grudges, moments where cooperation nearly broke down entirely. But when the reports came in confirming the swarm's approach, those differences shrank quickly in the face of a threat that did not care about borders, politics, or old rivalries. The plan, developed over months of careful study of the recovered Kalith data, was not to fight the swarm head-on in open battle, the way humanity had first considered doing. Wen Li's science teams, working alongside military strategists, had identified a critical weakness buried in the Calith's recorded observations. The swarm's coordination, the thing that made it so dangerous, depended on a network of communication signals passed between individual drones at incredible speed. Disrupt that network, even briefly, and the swarm's usually perfect coordination broke down into something far more chaotic and far easier to fight. The Calith had never managed to exploit this weakness in time to save themselves. Humanity intended to do better. Over the following 11 days, the Second Chance and dozens of other ships gathered at a defensive position near the edge of the inner colonies, a choke point carefully chosen based on the swarm's projected path. Engineers worked constantly to install newly developed disruption arrays on every ship capable of carrying them, devices designed to flood local space with the kind of chaotic signal interference that the Calith data suggested could scramble the swarm's coordination network, at least temporarily. Elena spent those 11 days doing what she had always done best under pressure, preparing, planning, and refusing to let fear paralyze her. She met with her crew individually, many of them young, inexperienced, terrified despite months of training. She thought often of Marcus Cole, of Talia Reyes, and Devon Okafor, who had both insisted on serving aboard the Second Chance, despite everything they had already survived together. "You scared?" Talia asked her, the night before the swarm was expected to arrive, the two women sharing a rare quiet moment in the ship's observation deck. "Every day," Elena admitted, "but scared doesn't mean we stop. Sethriv taught me that, in a strange way. His people were peaceful, and it cost them everything. We don't have that luxury." "No," Talia agreed, "we don't." The Devourer cloud arrived on the 11th day exactly when projected, a vast, pale smear against the darkness of space that grew larger and more terrifying with every passing minute as it approached the assembled human and allied fleet. Sensor readings confirmed it. Over 1 million individual drone units, moving with the same silent, coordinated hunger that had consumed the Calith homeworld and countless other worlds before it. "All ships, this is Fleet Command," Kessler's voice came over the combined comm channels, steady despite the enormity of what was about to happen. "Deploy disruption arrays on my mark. We do not fight this thing head-on. We break its coordination, and we make it fight us on our terms." Elena gripped the arms of her captain's chair, watching the pale, terrible cloud grow closer on the main view screen. "Deploy array," she ordered. Across the fleet, hundreds of ships activated their disruption arrays simultaneously, flooding local space with carefully designed chaotic signals. For a tense, uncertain moment, nothing seemed to happen, and Elena felt her heart pounding with the fear that the Calith data had been wrong, that this plan, humanity's best hope, would fail exactly the way the Calith's own defense had failed. Then, on the view screen, the vast swarm began to falter. Not all at once, but gradually, sections of the perfectly coordinated cloud began moving erratically, drones colliding with each other, groups splitting off from the main body in confused, uncoordinated patterns. The disruption arrays were working, breaking apart the eerie unity that had made the Devourer cloud nearly unstoppable against the peaceful Calith. "Now," Kessler's voice rang out. "All ships, engage." What followed was not a clean, easy victory. Elena would remember, for the rest of her life, the chaos of that battle. Ships weaving between clusters of confused, disconnected drones, weapons fire lighting up the darkness, the constant, desperate work of protecting the disruption arrays that were the only thing keeping the swarm from reforming its terrible unity. Ships were lost. People died, on the Second Chance and across the fleet, brave men and women who had trained for this moment and paid the ultimate price when it finally arrived. But the swarm, without its coordination, without the terrible unified intelligence that had made it so effective against the unprepared Calith, proved far more vulnerable than anyone had dared hope. Individual drones, cut off from the larger network, showed limited ability to adapt or strategize on their own. Human and allied ships, fighting with weapons and tactics developed specifically for this fight, began methodically destroying isolated clusters of drones, faster than the swarm could reform its coordination. The battle raged for nearly 6 hours before the Devourer cloud, reduced to barely a third of its original numbers, and unable to reform the coordination that had made it so dangerous, began retreating, scattering into the darkness of space, no longer capable of mounting a coordinated attack on humanity's defenses. It wasn't destroyed entirely. Elena knew, along with everyone else in Fleet Command, that remnants of the swarm still existed somewhere out in the dark, potentially capable of slowly rebuilding given enough time. The war, if it could even be called something as simple as a war, was far from truly over. But humanity had done something the Caliph never managed to do. They had survived the Devourer Cloud's first major assault, and more than that, they had hurt it, badly, forcing it to retreat rather than simply consuming everything in its path the way it always had before. Standing on the bridge of the Second Chance, watching the shattered remnants of the swarm scatter into the darkness, Elena thought of Sethriv one final time, of his dying wish that humanity be warned in time to avoid his people's fate. "We heard you," she said quietly, "to a friend long dead, to a species that no longer existed except in memory and recovered data. We're still here." In the months that followed, humanity did not simply celebrate the victory and grow complacent. Kessler, Wen Li, and the rest of Fleet Command understood, better than anyone, that a wounded enemy was still a dangerous one. Efforts began immediately to track the scattered remnants of the Devourer Cloud, to understand how it might rebuild, and to prepare defenses that would ensure humanity was never caught unprepared again. Elena Voss became something of a legendary figure across human space, though she never fully grew comfortable with the attention. She continued serving in Fleet Command, eventually taking on a role training new captains in the lessons learned from both the destruction of the Caliph and humanity's hard-won victory against the swarm. She kept Sethrib's memory stone with her always, a reminder of the cost of unpreparedness and of the debt humanity owed to a peaceful species who had given their last breath to ensure someone else might survive where they had not. Humanity had changed in the aftermath of the Devourer Cloud's first assault. Old rivalries had not vanished entirely, but something new had grown alongside them, a hard-earned understanding that survival, real survival, required people to stand together against threats too large for any single nation, colony, or species to face alone. The universe remained a dangerous place, full of threats both known and unknown. But for the first time in a long while, humanity faced that danger not with fear alone, but with the stubborn, unbreakable resolve of a species that had been warned in time, and had chosen, against all odds, to fight rather than fall. The Nightfall's Edge, fully repaired and restored to active service, continued its work as a scout ship along the edges of known space, watching for any sign of the Devourer Cloud's return. Elena visited it sometimes, walking its familiar corridors, remembering the crew she had lost, and the terrible warning she had carried home against impossible odds. It had been enough. Just barely, but enough. And as humanity continued rebuilding, preparing, and reaching further into the stars than ever before, one truth remained clear to everyone who had lived through those 14 desperate months. Whatever else came out of the darkness in the years ahead, humanity would be ready for it. They would always be ready.